In Soviet Georgia, a child named Goderji bought his own gospel at age 7, sparking a devotion so radical that years later he would set fire to Lenin's portrait before thousands, earning the title of Madman. But when stories of miracles began to spread, what people thought they understood about faith and defiance was turned upside down. How does a persecuted monk become a living legend? And what hidden cost did sanctity demand? The answer begins long before the world called him Saint Gabriel. Goderdzi's world was shaped by quiet acts of devotion. At just 7 years old, he set aside his own coins to purchase a gospel, carrying it everywhere as a treasured companion. The small book became his teacher, its words lighting a path that few around him understood. Icons of Christ and the saints soon filled his room, each one carefully chosen, each one a silent prayer. Even as a child, Goderdzi refused to eat on Wednesdays and Fridays, observing the ancient fasts of the Orthodox Church with a seriousness that surprised his elders. These were not habits pressed upon him by family or clergy. They were the fruit of a longing that seemed to burn from within. Neighbors would recall the sight of the boy, lips moving in prayer, eyes fixed on sacred images while other children played in the streets. In a time when faith was often hidden or ridiculed, Goderdzi's zeal set him apart. The seeds of his later strength and endurance were already taking root, nourished by a love for Christ that asked everything of him, even in childhood. In the years after his childhood devotion, Goderdzi's faith only grew stronger. The world around him remained skeptical, even hostile. During his military service in 1949, fellow soldiers jeered when he refused to join their amusements, mocking his prayers and his fasting. Yet, he did not waver. Instead, the trials deepened his resolve. By the late 1950s, this private fire drew the attention of the church. Bishop Gabriel Chachanidze, a figure respected for his discernment, recognized the seriousness in the young man's heart. At Samtavro Monastery, surrounded by ancient stone and the quiet rhythm of monastic life, Goderdzi made his formal commitment. On February 23, 1960, he was tonsured as a monk and given the name Gabriel. The ceremony, recorded in the monastery archives, was more than tradition. It was a public witness, a crossing over from lay zeal to the lifelong obedience of the habit. In the days that followed, Bishop Gabriel ordained him as a priest-monk, entrusting him with the sacred mysteries. The mockery of the past faded into memory, replaced by the silent strength of vows spoken before God and the Church. This was the foundation for all that would come, a commitment that would soon be tested in ways no one could foresee. May Day in Tbilisi, 1965. The city's central square was packed shoulder to shoulder. Red banners hung from every building, and a towering portrait of Lenin loomed above the crowd, its painted eyes fixed on the masses gathered below. Loudspeakers blared speeches from party officials, while the air crackled with the heavy scent of kerosene and anticipation. Father Gabriel, still in his cassock after serving the divine liturgy, moved quietly through the throng. He carried a battered canister, borrowed earlier that morning from Temera, the candle seller at Kvetari Church. She had handed it over without question, thinking it would be used for cleaning wax. Instead, Gabriel slipped away, eyes set on the balcony above the square, where the portrait of Lenin stretched nearly the height of the building. He found an open window behind the rostrum, the noise of the parade masking his steps. With practiced hands, He poured the kerosene over the canvas, soaking the painted image until it glistened in the morning sun. For a moment, he paused. Then, with a single match, he set the portrait alight. Flames raced upward, devouring Lenin's face. The bulbs strung around the frame began to burst, one after another, sending sparks and smoke into the sky. The crowd froze in disbelief. For several long seconds, no one moved. Then Gabriel stepped onto the balcony, his voice carrying over the chaos. "Why do you bow before idols? Glory is not due to this dead man, but to Christ, the God, who crushed death and gave us eternal life." His words cut through the confusion, echoing off the stone facades and into the stunned silence. Panic broke out. Some in the crowd shouted in fear, others in anger. Security officers surged forward. Stones and fists flew. Gabriel tried to descend from the balcony, but was seized and beaten by a mob that had turned violent in an instant. Eyewitnesses would later recall the brutality: kicks, blows, blood on the pavement. He was dragged away, barely conscious, his priestly garments torn and stained. KGB agents closed in, hustling him through the crowd and into a waiting car. Within minutes, he was locked in a cell beneath the headquarters of the Georgian security services. The interrogations began almost immediately. Shalva Nadarashvili, the Minister of Internal Affairs, demanded that Gabriel remove his cross and renounce his faith. Gabriel refused, even as the threats grew sharper. The authorities wanted a confession, a statement linking his act to a wider church conspiracy. He gave them only silence or words of prayer. The cost of this witness was severe. Gabriel's body bore the marks of the beating for months. He was transferred to a psychiatric hospital, where Soviet doctors diagnosed him as a psychopathic individual who believes in God and angels. For 7 months, he was confined as a lunatic, his faith recast as madness by the state. No trial was held, no public record was made. The story spread quietly among believers, whispered as both warning and inspiration. On that May morning, the collision between faith and power was not an abstract struggle. It was played out in fire, in blood, and in the silent defiance of a man who refused to bow to any idol but Christ. The square returned to order, but the memory of the flames lingered, an act that could not be explained away, only suppressed. For Gabriel, the price of witness was now measured not just in suffering, but in the world's refusal to understand. Gabriel's release from the psychiatric ward marked the start of a life that confunded every expectation. He chose not to hide or reclaim respectability, but instead walked the streets of Tbilisi as a fool for Christ, a path both ancient and radical within the Orthodox tradition. Barefoot and disheveled, he preached to anyone who would listen, sometimes shouting warnings against pride or greed, sometimes blessing stray dogs or beggars. Children trailed behind, laughing or hurling stones. Adults whispered, some crossing themselves, others shaking their heads. Gabriel met every insult with a smile or a whispered prayer, never returning anger for scorn. He slipped into abandoned or shuttered churches, sweeping floors and lighting candles where worship had been forbidden. In sanctuaries stripped of icons and stained by years of neglect, he knelt and sang the old hymns, his voice echoing in the emptiness. Gabriel sought out ruined chapels, restoring them with his own hands and the coins he collected from passers-by. Where the authorities saw trespass, Gabriel saw a chance to reclaim what had been lost. Each act of restoration was a quiet defiance, a reminder that the sacred could not be erased by decree or neglect. His behavior unsettled even the faithful. Gabriel wore rags in winter, ate scraps from the ground, and sometimes feigned drunkenness or madness. To outsiders, it looked like lunacy. But within the Orthodox Church, such acts belong to the tradition of holy foolishness, selos. The fool for Christ accepts humiliation and ridicule, stripping away pride to expose the emptiness of worldly power. In this self-emptying, or kenosis, the fool becomes a vessel for grace, drawing attention away from himself and toward God. Elder Paisios of Mount Athos, whose teachings shaped a generation, described the fool for Christ as one who, by God's grace, pretends to be mad, enduring mockery to guard the secret fire of humility. Paisios told of ascetics who scattered gifts to avoid praise, or who hid their spiritual gifts behind a mask of folly. For him, holy foolishness was a radical form of love, a way of emptying oneself so Christ could fill the soul. Through this lens, Gabriel's actions became signs of a deeper wisdom, not symptoms of illness. He refused to accept the world's terms for sanity or value, choosing instead the logic of the gospel. To lose everything for Christ is to gain everything that matters. Gabriel's wandering, poverty, and public rebukes were deliberate steps on a path that led through humiliation to hidden glory. The more he was mocked, the more he gave away, the deeper his prayers seemed to reach. Some began to notice that those who sought him out found comfort, and that the churches he cleaned slowly came back to life. Over time, the reputation of madness gave way to quiet reverence. The seeds of holy foolishness, planted in ridicule, bore fruit in ways no one could have predicted. Through Gabriel's eyes, the world's wisdom was turned upside down, and the forgotten became sacred once more. Pilgrims began to arrive at Samtavro Monastery not long after Gabriel's repose in 1995. Some came quietly, kneeling at the edge of his grave. Their prayers were a mixture of hope and desperation. Others traveled great distances, drawn by stories whispered among the faithful, accounts of healing, comfort, and unexpected peace. The monastery's register, kept by the sisters, soon filled with entries describing events that could not be explained by ordinary means. One woman, suffering from persistent ulcers that no medicine could touch, left a written testimony in October 2018. She described an overnight change after being anointed with oil from the lamp that burned at Gabriel's tomb. Within days, her wounds closed and the pain faded. The entry was signed and dated, a matter-of-fact record in the monastery's hand. In another case, from 2019, a family brought their young son, burdened by a complex cyst that had resisted months of treatment. They prayed at the grave, leaving behind a photograph and a note. According to the family's account, confirmed by their parish priest, follow-up scans showed no trace of the cyst. The medical records referenced in their letter were attached to the testimony, which now sits among dozens like it in the archives at Samtavro. Each story is different, but the pattern is unmistakable. Prayers offered, oil or earth from the grave taken home, and then, sometimes suddenly, sometimes gradually, restoration where none was expected. The Holy Synod of the Georgian Orthodox Church took notice as these accounts multiplied. The process was careful, involving both clergy and lay witnesses, and weighing the stories alongside Gabriel's life as a confessor and fool for Christ. On December 20th, 2012, the Synod issued its decree. Hero monk Gabriel was to be numbered among the saints. November 2nd, the date of his death, became his official feast day. The act was not just a recognition of miracles, but a public affirmation of a life poured out for Christ in the face of ridicule and suffering. Since his canonization, the flow of pilgrims has only increased. The grave at Samtavro remains a place of prayer and hope, its surface worn smooth by the hands of those who come seeking help. The monastery's register continues to grow, each entry a quiet testament to the enduring power of faith. For many, these stories are more than legend. They are the living memory of a saint whose presence is still felt, not only in Georgia, but wherever his name is invoked. November 2nd arrives each year with quiet processions at Samtavro. Pilgrims gather before dawn, candles flickering in the cool air, as the monastery bells call the faithful to prayer. The feast day of Saint Gabriel is marked by the ancient rites of the Orthodox Church, matins, the divine liturgy, and the solemn chanting of his troparion. The words rise through the incense. You appeared as a bright star in the land of Georgia, O Father Gabriel, shining with the light of Christ, enlightening those who dwell in darkness. The troparion, sung in both Georgian and Church Slavonic, weaves his story into the rhythm of worship. It is not only a song of praise, but a reminder that sanctity is found in humility, in endurance, and in the willingness to be misunderstood for the sake of love. The faithful venerate his icon, bowing before the image of a man who wore rags and bore ridicule, yet whose eyes reflect a joy untouched by the world's scorn. On this day, the Sisters of Samtavro read aloud from Saint Gabriel's last will and testament. His words, penned near the end of his life, echo the Gospel's call to simplicity. God is love. The goal of life is the acquisition of the kingdom of heaven. He does not claim greatness for himself. Instead, he confesses, "There is no man who lives and does not sin. I alone am a great sinner." Another line, often repeated by those who knew him, stands out for its clarity and depth. Truth is in the immortality of the spirit. These short sayings, preserved in monastery archives and passed from mouth to mouth, have become a kind of spiritual bread for those who seek guidance. They are not complicated. They do not promise easy answers. But in their humility, they point beyond themselves to the mystery of God's mercy. During the feast, the troparion is chanted again as pilgrims approach Gabriel's grave. Some press folded papers to the stone, prayers written in hope or gratitude. Others stand in silence, letting the words of the chant and the aphorisms from Gabriel's will settle in their hearts. The rituals do not end with the service. They continue in the sharing of blessed bread, in the lighting of lamps, and in the quiet conversations that fill the monastery's courtyards. Here, worship is not a performance, but a living memory, renewed each year by the voices of the faithful and the enduring wisdom of a saint who called himself the least of all. In these moments, Gabriel's life becomes a liturgy, a continual offering, sealed by words that endure long after the candles have burned low. In a world where faith is often dismissed as folly, the canonization of Saint Gabriel by the Georgian Orthodox Church in 2012 stands as a living challenge to cynicism. Pilgrims still gather at Samtavro, seeking hope amid uncertainty. His witness confronts us. What are we willing to risk for truth? Sometimes the so-called mad are the clearest mirrors of what we lack. Thank you for joining this journey.